December 7th, 1944, Saipan. Darkness pressed in from every angle, thick and suffocating, as a lone U.S. Marine crouched low, flamethrower strapped to his back. The smell of damp earth mixed with the faint metallic tang of sweat and fear. Every footstep echoed, swallowed, and returned by the winding tunnels carved deep into the volcanic rock. Ahead, the narrow passage twisted like a serpent, and somewhere in the shadows the enemy waited. A soft hiss broke the silence, the sound of ignition, a thin line of flame licking out from the nozzle. In that instant, the tunnel transformed. The walls glowed orange, shadows danced and writhed, and the heat pressed against skin and bone. The Marine's heart pounded as he advanced, aware that behind every curve and in every hidden alcove, Japanese soldiers lurked, trained to fight not just with rifles and grenades, but with the psychological edge of darkness itself. Tunnel warfare in the Pacific was unlike anything seen in Europe or the deserts of North Africa. These were not mere bunkers or foxholes. They were intricately dug labyrinths, fortified with ingenuity, stocked with supplies, and defended with a near-fanatical resolve. Japanese troops, masters of concealment, had learned to turn the very earth into a weapon. For them, the tunnels were more than shelter. They were a strategy, a fortress invisible to the planes and artillery above. But the Americans had learned that conventional firepower, bullets and bombs, could only do so much. Somewhere in the dusty intelligence briefings and field experiments, a terrifying solution had emerged. Flamethrowers. Devastating, precise, and horrifyingly effective. In the tunnels, fire became more than a weapon. It became a psychological force, a moving, living threat that forced soldiers out of their hiding places and into exposure. The central tension of this underground war was stark. The hidden genius of the Japanese defenders versus the relentless ingenuity of U.S. forces armed with technology designed to turn every shadow into a nightmare. It was a clash not just of armies, but of survival instincts, courage under pressure, and the brutal calculus of fear. Every flame, every hiss of burning fuel, tested the limits of human resolve. And yet the question remained: what drove this brutal close-quarters struggle beneath the island? How did these tunnels, dug meticulously in secrecy, shape the fate of entire campaigns? The answer lay in understanding the very nature of the battlefield itself, where visibility was a luxury, and every move could be life or death. To understand why fire became the weapon of choice, we must first descend into the world of the tunnels themselves. Beneath the shattered landscapes of Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and Saipan, an invisible war raged, a war that few on the surface could see, but whose effects would be felt with terrifying clarity by every soldier who descended into the darkness. The Japanese had transformed the very earth into a weapon, carving intricate networks of tunnels that ranged from small, cramped foxholes to sprawling labyrinths that stretched for miles, interconnecting caves, command posts, and supply depots. From the outside, the islands appeared quiet, deceptively calm, but below, a fortress teemed with soldiers, waiting, watching, ready to strike. These tunnels were more than simple shelters. They were a reflection of a mindset honed over centuries, shaped by the Bushido Code, and a doctrine that prized honor above life itself. Surrender was not an option. Every soldier was trained to resist, to fight to the death, to turn each battle into an exercise in attrition. The tunnels became the perfect manifestation of this philosophy, a place where numerical disadvantage could be offset by ingenuity, where the natural terrain amplified the defender's resolve. Strategically, tunnels offered unparalleled protection. Artillery shells and aerial bombardments that would devastate open positions above ground often had little effect on these underground sanctuaries. Soldiers could retreat, regroup, and re-emerge through hidden exits to launch sudden, devastating counterattacks. The tunnels were lined with hidden rifle ports, booby traps, and choke points designed to slow advancing forces. Every twist and turn was a calculated gamble for the attacker, a deadly maze where one wrong step could mean death. For Allied troops, the tunnels were an enigma and a terror. Men moving cautiously through the volcanic rock or dense jungle above never knew where a sudden burst of fire, a grenade, or even the echo of footsteps might come from below. They were fighting ghosts, shadows of men who seemed to vanish into the earth itself, only to reappear when least expected. The darkness played tricks on the mind. The air was heavy, often thick with smoke, dust, and the lingering scent of gunpowder. Each soldier had to contend not just with the enemy's weapons, but with the psychological strain of not knowing when the next attack would strike, or if the tunnels would collapse around them. The ingenuity of these subterranean fortifications was staggering. Some tunnels contained entire hospitals, ammunition depots, and communication lines, allowing Japanese forces to sustain prolonged resistance even under relentless bombardment. They were masterclasses in concealment and resilience, a testament to a strategy that relied on patience, stealth, and the ability to turn the environment itself into a deadly tool. Yet, this hidden war was a nightmare for those forced to confront it. For every passage cleared, for every chamber captured, another might lie just ahead, teeming with defenders prepared to fight to the last man. The Americans realized quickly that traditional tactics were insufficient. Firepower, speed, and bravery were only the beginning. They needed innovation to counter a force that refused to be seen, a strategy built on invisibility and surprise. But these tunnels weren't just hiding places. They became fortresses that would challenge every assumption about warfare, forcing soldiers to confront an enemy who existed not just in front of them, but beneath their very feet. By the time American forces stormed the beaches and cliffs of the Pacific Islands, the horrors of tunnel warfare had already been written in blood. Standard rifles and grenades could only do so much. Explosives rattled through the labyrinths, but often failed to reach the hidden defenders. Artillery pounded the terrain above, sending clouds of dust and rock, but Japanese troops emerged from hidden exits, unscathed, ready to strike with deadly precision. Conventional weapons had reached their limit, and the war demanded a new solution. Enter the flamethrower. The concept was not new. Primitive versions had existed in World War I, terrifying soldiers in the trenches of Europe. By World War II, engineers had refined the design into a mobile, devastatingly effective tool. For the U.S. military, the flamethrower offered something rifles could not: the ability to reach the unseen, to force enemies out of their carefully crafted hideaways, and to bring the light of fire into the darkest corners of the battlefield. Early American flamethrowers were heavy, cumbersome machines. Carried on the back of a single soldier, they were powered by pressurized fuel tanks and a mechanical ignition system. The operator was exposed, vulnerable, and acutely aware that a single misstep could be fatal. But the weapon's terror was undeniable. Even the men who carried them felt a mixture of fear and grim fascination. The hiss of fuel, the sudden eruption of flame, and the heat radiating through narrow tunnels created a weapon that was as psychological as it was physical. Initial encounters with flamethrowers underground were chaotic, terrifying, and transformative. Soldiers advancing through the volcanic rock of Iwo Jima or the dense jungles of Saipan discovered that fire could flush enemies from hidden positions almost instantly. The walls glowed orange, smoke twisted into every crevice, and the intense heat forced defenders into the open or into fatal mistakes. Every chamber became a furnace, every corner a potential death trap. The first Marines to wield these flamethrowers quickly realized they were not just delivering destruction, they were rewriting the rules of combat. The enemy could no longer rely on stealth or terrain. Every tunnel became a test of nerve, courage, and endurance, but the weapon exacted a cost. Carrying the flamethrower made soldiers prime targets. One bullet or grenade could ignite the fuel, turning the operator into a human torch. Despite the danger, the promise of ending stalemates and clearing fortified positions drove men forward, inch by inch, flame by flame. The flamethrower changed the battlefield. Where shadows once offered refuge, now there was only heat, smoke, and the relentless advance of fire. Japanese soldiers, trained to resist, found themselves confronted with an enemy they could neither predict nor hide from. The physical toll was immense, but the psychological impact would prove even more devastating. But the battle between flesh and flame wasn't just about technology, it became a psychological war. One that would leave men forever altered by the fire they unleashed and the shadows it consumed. In the dim, suffocating tunnels of the Pacific Islands, fire was more than a weapon. It was a force that penetrated the mind as much as the body. For Japanese defenders, the flamethrower was a nightmare made real. Death by fire was considered one of the most dishonorable ends, a fate so horrifying it shook even the bravest men. The walls of their hidden fortresses, once symbols of protection and control, became ovens of terror. Every hiss of fuel, every flare of flame, ignited a primal fear that no training could erase. Inside these tunnels, the air itself seemed to betray them. Smoke curled into every corner, choking, blinding, suffocating. Soldiers who had survived artillery barrages and hand-to-hand combat found themselves immobilized, paralyzed by the thought of immolation. Many accounts describe frantic attempts to escape, desperate movements into dead-end chambers, or sudden surrender. Acts that would have been unthinkable above ground. The flamethrower transformed the battlefield from a test of skill and strategy into a trial of human endurance and terror. For the American troops wielding these weapons, the psychological toll was equally profound. Carrying a flamethrower into a tunnel was a constant dance with death. The fuel tanks strapped to their backs were volatile, every step a risk, every misfire potentially catastrophic. Snipers and concealed defenders above or within the tunnels targeted operators, fully aware that a single bullet could turn the weapon, and the soldier, into a lethal explosion. Men went forward knowing that the very tool giving them power also marked them as prime targets, a paradox of survival and vulnerability. War diaries and post-battle testimonies reveal the dual weight of fear. Japanese soldiers spoke of the unbearable heat, the blinding light, and the sense that the fire was alive, hunting them through the labyrinth. American Marines described the suffocating smoke, the oppressive weight of their own equipment, and the moral strain of witnessing the devastation they unleashed. Both sides were trapped in a psychological crucible, where courage was tested not just by enemy fire, but by the elemental force of flame itself. The terror of fire reshaped behavior in ways that bullets and shells never could. Japanese troops trained for stealth and precision often abandoned calculated strategies in moments of panic. American flamethrower operators had to learn to move with deliberate caution, to balance aggression with the constant awareness of vulnerability. The battle became a chess match of fear, every corner, every chamber a psychological trap as much as a physical one. And yet, amid this shared dread, a grim effectiveness emerged. The flamethrower forced a confrontation with the most elemental human fear, exposing weakness, breaking morale, and reshaping the course of combat. The terror it sowed proved that warfare was not only about weapons, tactics, or terrain, it was about controlling the mind itself. As fear grew on both sides, the Pacific Campaign pushed these weapons to their deadliest proving ground, setting the stage for battles that would be remembered not just for their ferocity, but for the invisible war waged inside the minds of every soldier. February 19, 1945, Iwo Jima. The air was thick with smoke, the ground torn and blackened from relentless bombardment. From the ocean, American Marines stormed the beaches, braving gunfire and treacherous terrain. But the real battle awaited beneath the surface. Hidden within the island's volcanic ridges were tunnels, vast, interconnected networks that allowed Japanese soldiers to strike, disappear, and strike again. Above ground, the fighting raged. Below, another war unfolded, silent but deadly. For the Marines, conventional tactics quickly proved insufficient. Rifle fire, grenades, and artillery could not reach the depths of the enemy's subterranean strongholds. Entire bunkers seemed impervious, fortified with ingenuity and manned by soldiers whose resolve was unshakable. In these moments, the flamethrower became not just a weapon, but a lifeline. Teams of demolition experts and flame operators worked together, clearing rooms, sealing tunnels, and flushing out defenders who had once seemed untouchable. Each burst of flame illuminated the tunnels, revealing the enemy's positions and eroding the illusion of invincibility. The experience was harrowing. Marines recount the suffocating heat, the smoke that choked lungs and blurred vision, and the relentless roar of the flamethrowers echoing through narrow passages. One soldier described advancing into a tunnel, only to see the walls glow orange as flames consumed every hiding spot. Another recalled the terror of knowing that at any moment, a trapped soldier could strike from the shadows, turning every corner into a potential death trap. It was a war of inches, a struggle of nerves, stamina, and sheer will. Yet the Japanese defenders were relentless. Trained in the Bushido code, they chose death over surrender, setting booby traps, fortifying choke points, and exploiting every structural weakness to their advantage. Even when the flames forced them out of their tunnels, many fought to the last breath, unwilling to yield. Their determination transformed the tunnels into a crucible, where courage and ingenuity were tested against the elemental force of fire. Flamethrowers and demolition charges gradually turned the tide. Rooms once thought impenetrable were reduced to rubble, and tunnels were sealed, trapping defenders or forcing them into open combat, where American forces held the advantage. The psychological impact was just as profound as the physical. Soldiers who had relied on the darkness for protection now faced the unbearable reality of immolation, and the oppressive heat and light eroded their will to fight. Every chamber cleared was a victory, not just in territory, but in breaking the enemy's morale. By the end of the campaign, Iwo Jima had become a testament to both the horrors and ingenuity of warfare. The combination of flamethrowers, demolition teams, and unyielding courage allowed the Marines to conquer a fortress designed to resist the mightiest assault. The island's volcanic tunnels, once symbols of Japanese ingenuity and determination, had been transformed into stages for one of the most intense psychological and physical battles in the Pacific theater. But even as Iwo Jima fell, a grim realization settled over the U.S. forces. The tactics honed here, the lessons learned in claustrophobic tunnels and scorching chambers, would soon be tested on an even larger scale. The war beneath the earth was far from over. Iwo Jima was only the beginning. The next battle would unleash even greater. Firestorms, April 1, 1945, Okinawa. The largest amphibious assault in the Pacific theater had begun, and the island quickly earned its grim reputation as the bloodiest of the war. From jagged cliffs to dense sugarcane fields, every corner of Okinawa was a potential battlefield. But the most insidious fight unfolded below the surface. Japanese soldiers had transformed the island into a sprawling subterranean fortress, with tunnels snaking for miles, connecting bunkers, caves, and hidden strongpoints. For the Marines and Army units advancing inland, the land above was only half the danger. The earth itself concealed an enemy prepared to resist at every turn. Tunnel warfare on Okinawa was a nightmare amplified. These networks were larger and more complex than anything encountered on Iwo Jima. Soldiers advancing through caves and narrow passageways faced not only gunfire, but also booby traps, sudden collapses, and hidden chambers filled with defenders. Conventional attacks had proved insufficient, and once again the flamethrower emerged as the weapon capable of breaching what bullets could not. Teams of flame operators and demolition squads moved methodically, room by room, cave by cave, forcing defenders into impossible choices: flee, fight, or perish in the fire. The use of flamethrowers was devastatingly effective, but it came with a horrifying human cost. Japanese soldiers trained to fight to the last man often refused to surrender. Many died in the tunnels, trapped by the very structures they had used for protection. Flames swept through chambers, incinerating bunkers and sending plumes of smoke into interconnected passages. The psychological toll on the defenders was catastrophic, as the fear of immolation overwhelmed even the most disciplined troops. American soldiers also bore immense risk. Carrying fuel tanks through narrow tunnels made them vulnerable to enemy fire, while the dense smoke, heat, and debris created suffocating conditions. Many Marines described advancing in near-total darkness, relying on the flickering light of the flame to guide their way, knowing that one misstep could mean death. The terror was mutual. Both sides endured extreme fear. Yet the flamethrower had shifted the balance of power, forcing the defenders out of hiding and breaking the illusion of invulnerability. The human cost extended beyond the combatants. Okinawa was home to tens of thousands of civilians, many of whom had taken shelter in caves to escape the relentless bombardment. Fire often swept through these refugees, adding a tragic dimension to the campaign. Innocent lives were caught between two unstoppable forces: the hidden determination of the Japanese defenders and the unforgiving advance of American troops armed with fire. These civilian tragedies underscored the terrible reality of total war, where even ingenuity and strategy could not spare the innocent from devastation. By the end of the battle, Okinawa had become a searing testament to the lethal combination of subterranean fortifications and flamethrower warfare. The tunnels that had once promised safety were reduced to chambers of ash and ruin. The island's defenders, once masters of concealment and endurance, were systematically unmade by fire, technology, and relentless courage. The lessons learned here about tunnel strategy, psychological warfare, and the devastating efficiency of fire would shape the final stages of the Pacific campaign. And yet, even as these islands burned, planners were already envisioning something far worse: an invasion of Japan itself. By mid-1945, the war in the Pacific had pushed both sides to the brink. The islands had burned, but the ultimate objective remained: Japan itself. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the home islands, was shaping up to be the most devastating campaign in military history. Planners knew that Japanese defenders would not surrender. They anticipated elaborate tunnel networks beneath cities, caves carved into hills, and fortified underground positions that could hide millions of soldiers and civilians. The Americans braced for a confrontation unlike any before. Flamethrowers, honed in Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, were expected to play a central role. Engineers envisioned teams of operators advancing through urban ruins and volcanic ridges, clearing tunnels room by room, forcing defenders from concealed positions with fire. The scale was unprecedented. Entire neighborhoods could contain hidden networks, turning each hill, each building into a potential death trap. The calculations of casualties were grim. Estimates predicted unimaginable losses, both military and civilian, as fire explosives, and close-quarters combat converged underground. Psychological preparation was as critical as physical training. U.S. troops were briefed on the horrors awaiting them: smoke-choked tunnels, the oppressive heat of flamethrowers, and the near certainty of encountering soldiers who would fight to the death. Marines and Army units rehearsed advanced techniques, clearing mock bunkers and navigating claustrophobic passages, aware that fear would be their constant companion. They had learned from previous battles that technology alone could not secure victory. Discipline, courage, and mental endurance were as vital as the fire they carried. Japanese defenders, meanwhile, prepared in parallel. Entire communities were mobilized to dig, fortify, and stockpile underground shelters. Civilians were conscripted into labor, moving supplies, reinforcing walls, and preparing traps. Military planners instilled the expectation that every man, woman, and child could become a combatant if necessary. The idea of death by fire was terrifying, yet the Bushido ethos framed it as honorable, a final defiant resistance against an unstoppable foe. In this crucible of anticipation, the stage was set for a war beneath the earth that promised to test humanity's limits. Even in planning, the scale of the conflict was staggering. Every strategy accounted for the dual challenge of tunnel fortifications and civilian presence, knowing that fire could sweep through both with indiscriminate ferocity. Psychologists and military strategists warned of the moral and emotional toll on troops tasked with forcing people from their shelters, and the long-lasting trauma this underground inferno would inflict. The anticipation of fire, suffocating smoke, and the weight of responsibility created a palpable tension in the ranks. But before Operation Downfall could begin, before the firestorm could engulf Japan's home islands, an unexpected weapon arrived, one that would eclipse even the flames and forever change the calculus of war. August 6, 1945. Hiroshima. A blinding flash split the sky, followed by a roar that seemed to come from the very earth itself. 3 days later, Nagasaki suffered the same fate. The atomic bombs rendered years of brutal grinding warfare almost instantaneous. Where flamethrowers had demanded room-by-room clearing, heat, smoke, and unimaginable patience, nuclear fire reduced entire cities to ash in seconds. The slow, suffocating terror of tunnels and caves was replaced by a new kind of horror: total annihilation. Yet the contrast between the methods is stark. The flamethrower forced soldiers to confront fear up close, inch by inch. Each chamber cleared was a battle of nerves, endurance, and strategy. Death was immediate for those caught in the flames, but survival depended on skill, courage, and adaptability. Nuclear fire, by contrast, offered no such struggle. It was absolute. One moment life, the next moment nothing. The psychological impact, however, shared a chilling thread. Both relied on fear as a weapon. Both imposed an overwhelming sense of inevitability. Historians continue to debate the connection. Some argue that the horrors of tunnel warfare, the relentless fear of fire, the creeping suffocation, the moral weight of forcing men from their hiding places, helped prepare both military planners and the public psyche for the extreme step of nuclear attack. Americans had witnessed, through Marines' accounts and news reports, the terrifying efficiency of fire in war, and perhaps subconsciously, it shaped expectations of what was necessary to end the conflict decisively. For the soldiers who had wielded flamethrowers, the bombs were almost unimaginable. Many veterans described a sense of awe, horror, and disbelief. They had stared into heat and smoke, forced men from the darkness, and yet here was a weapon that obliterated life in an instant, with no chance of negotiation or escape. The experience highlighted both the relentless ingenuity of warfare and the escalating scale of human destruction. Even after the bombs, the scars of tunnel fire warfare refused to fade. Veterans carried the memories of suffocating smoke, screaming defenders, and the weight of lives ended in close quarters. The psychological imprint lingered far longer than physical injuries, a testament to the unique terror of the flamethrower, a weapon that had forced men to confront death in its most intimate and elemental form. The lessons of fire, fear, and psychological endurance would echo for decades, shaping military doctrine, memory, and the understanding of war's most harrowing dimensions. For the veterans who fought in the Pacific, The memories of fire did not end when the battlefields grew silent. The tunnels they had cleared, the caves they had lit with flames, remained etched in their minds. Men recalled the suffocating heat pressing against their bodies, the choking smoke that blurred vision and burned lungs, and the screams of Japanese defenders trapped by the very walls they had hoped would protect them. Even decades later, a single smell of smoke, a flash of orange light, or a quiet echo could transport them back to those suffocating corridors of terror. Japanese survivors carried their own burdens. Families who had lost sons, fathers, and brothers in the labyrinthine tunnels mourned lives ended in darkness and fire. The fortifications that had been built to protect had become tombs. For many, the memories of smoke-filled tunnels, collapsing chambers, and the relentless advance of American flame operators were more than historical footnotes. They were scars that cut deep into the fabric of their communities, reminders of lives extinguished too soon and of the unrelenting brutality of war. The flamethrower itself became a symbol of this horror. Its effectiveness on the battlefield was undeniable, but its use raised profound ethical questions. The intimate, personal nature of death by fire, forced from hiding, consumed in narrow chambers, made it a weapon that many viewed as cruel beyond measure. In the years following the war, international law moved to restrict and ban such weapons in certain contexts, recognizing the profound psychological and physical suffering they inflicted. Yet even as legal restrictions were codified, the flamethrower remained emblematic of a particular kind of warfare, one where terror was as much a tool as bullets or bombs, and where fear could be weaponized with lethal precision. The legacy of tunnel fire warfare extended beyond the immediate devastation. Military strategists studied the lessons of the Pacific campaigns, noting how psychological operations, technological innovation, and terrain exploitation could redefine combat. Historians and ethicists debated the moral cost, while veterans wrestled privately with memories that could not be erased. Both the physical and emotional scars of these battles endured, shaping perspectives on conflict, resilience, and the human capacity for both ingenuity and destruction. And yet, in the shadows of history, the tunnels still whisper their stories. They speak of courage under unimaginable pressure, of fear that could paralyze or galvanize, and of the relentless fire that forced soldiers to confront the limits of human endurance. These hidden corridors of the Pacific remain silent monuments to both the horrors of war and the resilience of those who survived, and to the lessons that only the darkness and the flames could teach. December 7th, 1944, Saipan, we return to the darkness. The tunnels stretch out once again, cold, silent, waiting. The same suffocating air, the same damp earth pressed against skin and bone. But now instead of footsteps and fire, there is only stillness. The echoes of war have faded, yet the questions it raised remain, heavy and unanswerable. War in the Pacific forced men into places no human being was ever meant to fight, into the belly of the earth itself. Down there, sight was scarce, air was thick, and time slowed into moments of fear and instinct. In those conditions, bullets and shells lost their power, and so humanity turned to something older, more primal: fire. Why fire? Because it could reach where men could not. Because in the twisting veins of volcanic rock, it illuminated what was hidden and forced out what was concealed. Fire did what steel could not. It stripped away the illusion of safety, the comfort of shadows. It was not just a weapon of destruction but of exposure. It revealed the unseen, and in doing so, changed the very nature of combat. The tunnels of Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa tell us more than the story of soldiers and strategies. They reveal the extremes of courage, cruelty, and survival. They remind us that bravery is not only in charging forward, but in advancing when every instinct screams to turn back. That cruelty can take the form of ingenuity, shaping the very earth into a weapon. And that survival sometimes demands tools that haunt both the enemy and the user forever. The flamethrower was never just metal and fuel. It was a symbol of desperation and adaptation, of mankind's relentless drive to overcome the unseen. For the defenders, it was terror made real. For the attackers, it was both salvation and burden. For history, it became a reminder that war is fought not only with weapons but with fear itself. Today, the tunnels lie in silence. Their walls no longer glow orange. Their chambers no longer echo with the hiss of fuel or the screams of men. But if you stand in the darkness long enough, imagination fills the void. You can almost hear the footsteps. You can almost feel the heat pressing against your skin. And that is the final lesson of the tunnels. The battles may be over, but the memories burn on. The earth still carries their scars, and so do those who walked within them. In the end, the tunnels of the Pacific are more than relics of war. They are mirrors, forcing us to ask questions we would rather avoid. Questions about how far humans will go when survival demands it. Questions about the cost of victory and the shadows it leaves behind. And one question above all: what does it mean when humanity chooses fire in the darkness to fight its battles?